Pioneer is back on the menu. Wizards has announced that the Pro Tour is going to be Pioneer and the qualifiers for Bologna will be Pioneer. We have to play some Pioneer decks, and who else could we ask what to do with this new format, with old format that we're getting back into, than Todd Anderson, Tandy on Twitch, the Pioneer guy. Todd Anderson, welcome to the Cardmarket YouTube channel.
Thank you so much for having me. Cardmarket, good stuff, good stuff. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to participate today. Thank you.
Well, we're super happy to have you here. For me, for the longest time, whenever I think Pioneer, I think you got some cards banned, you made Chunky Red a thing, you were the main carrier of the format forever. So we have some questions. Before you get into it, if you aren't up subbed yet, I know a lot of you aren't up subbed, we're really trying to grow the channel, our bosses look at this. If you sub, maybe we'll show you what to do when you draw all ramp and no payoff, who knows? But okay, Todd, but before we get into your top 5, do you mind answering some rapid fire questions about what's not on your list?
Shoot, fire away, man. You know, I'm here.
Okay. First question, you didn't put Mono Red in your top 5. Mono Red was a deck, why is it not in your top 5?
So, I think that Pioneer currently has a top 4. And so when you came at me and you're like, what's the top 5? I know what my top 4 are, but then there's like 4 to 6 decks kind of hovering on that 10% marker. And so for me, Mono Red is just another one of those decks that are kind of hovering on the outside. I do think that Mono Red is good. I just don't think that it's in the same echelon as the big 4.
Second question, Jund Sacrifice, Trailer Crumbs, Corvold, great cards, but not on your list. Why?
So Jund Sacrifice was really good when Karn could shut down a lot of artifacts, but Karn is no longer an auto win against those Rakdos Anvil decks that are running around because they're just not there anymore.
Okay, and Greasefang combo, it's a hot stuff. Why is Greasefang combo not even close to the list?
I love Greasefang. It won a bunch of stuff this past weekend, but it's just not consistent enough. Even with Fable the Mirror Breaker, you just have so many games where you can't put it, the Parhelan onto the battlefield, or your opponent's able to disrupt it by killing your creature or exiling your graveyard.
Now, we'll get into what people here wanted to hear. Rakdos mid-range. Why would you say would that be out on the outskirts of the top 5? You said a top 4. Why is this in the 5?
So I think that Rakdos and the variations within it are the 5th best archetype in the format. My big thing is that it's actually 2 different distinct decks. We have the Deadly Dispute version that plays a bunch of the Baldaran Epicures and sometimes Onicult Anvil. But then you have the more traditional Rakdos mid-range deck that plays Bone Crusher Giant. It goes all the way up to Kalitas Trader of Get. And the only reason why they're not technically top 5 in my opinion is because it's not one deck, it's 2 decks. So really you have like 2 5% decks that kind of combine into a 10% metric.
What makes them strong in this current metagame?
So the both versions have a lot of the same cards. They both have Thoughtseize, they both usually have Fatal Push, but what you're going to see from the Sacrifice deck is you're going to see an emphasis on engines. Engine cards that can be disrupted via Disenchants, via March of Otherworldly Light. That's where the Rakdos Sacrifice deck is going to maybe start to falter, is when the opponent is able to interact with one of your 2 pieces of your engine. It's going to make the other piece really look mediocre to bad.
All right, and how do you tackle these decks? Say you're showing up F&M, there's a lot of Rakdos of both types. How do you beat these decks?
So there's a number of ways to beat either of the Rakdos variants. I think that, like I said, the interacting with the engine pieces via non-traditional removal, March of Otherworldly Light, and these other things like Abrupt Decay. That's how you can stop the Onicult Anvils themselves. That's how you stop the Cat Oven synergies. But when it comes to beating the regular mid-range deck, you just have to overpower them. They are really shining on their efficiency. They have a lot of 2 and 3 mana cards that are just better on rate than a lot of pieces of interaction and threats from other decks. And so what you need to do is you need to kind of weather that storm of interaction. You need to take a hit from a Thoughtseize. You need to get your Llanowar Elves killed. And then you start playing things like Winota. You start returning Arclight Phoenix back from the graveyard. And when you start doing that, all those spot removal spells from the opponent just start to shrink in their hands and lose so much of their equity.
Okay, Todd, Tandy, Pioneer guy, let's talk about the 4th deck on your list. Is it Phoenix?
So, Is It Phoenix in general is a powerful deck, but it has interaction that is weak against control and weak against combo. But I think that the big downside for playing Is It Phoenix is that if you play against Lotus Field or you play against Azorius Control, you're going to have a ton of cards in your deck that just don't do anything. And when you're playing a constructive format as powerful as Pioneer, you're going to have matchups that are just completely polarized because your interaction is the wrong kind of interaction.
Okay, right. Now it's time to talk about Lotus Field, your number 3 pick.
So I'm not a big fan of combo decks, but I think Lotus Field is one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the format. I think that the card Lotus Field just gives you the ability to generate so much mana. And if you look at the format historically, the person who uses the most mana over the course of a game is usually the one that wins. That's one of the reasons why I was such an advocate for playing 4 copies of Mutavault in Mono Red when we were playing Chunky Red back in the day. That's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate of Llanowar Elves and other cards that give you that boost early so that you can start playing bigger and better cards before your opponent. And I think that Lotus Field kind of operates in this vacancy in the format. There's not a whole lot of combo decks running around. It doesn't play creatures other than Arboreal Grazer and Fae of Wishes, so it doesn't really care about Fatal Push. And you get to the point where the only things that really interact with Lotus Field ends up being Thoughtseize and counterspells. And the other way you interact with them is to kill them as quickly as possible, because they're kind of playing this goldfish game that wins almost every single time on turn 5. If you just don't do anything to them, they'll kill you on turn 5 almost every single time.
Okay, this deck seems hella scary. Now, what do you bring to your qualifier events or your FNMs? What cards do you bring if you're expecting to face Lotus Field?
So against Lotus Field specifically, even though they have Boseiju and probably a couple other ways to kill the interactive pieces, you beat them by having the specific sideboard cards that either lock down their Lotus Field or make sure that they can't cast more than one spell a turn. Eidolon of Rhetoric is really good out of the white aggro decks, but there's also a couple other creatures that do very similar things. Deafening Silence, also a nice sideboard card against them. When you move into decks like Mono Red, you actually don't need that much to interact with them because you're just faster. Whenever Underworld Breach was banned, the deck slowed down by at least a full turn, maybe 2 turns, and Mono Red just has a natural advantage against those combo decks, and I think that now with an extra 1-drop and Kumanos, you're just a bit faster than them. When you move into other decks like Blue-White Control, you're going to see cards like Narset, Parter of Veils shut down their card draw engines, and that's a way you can get a leg up on them. Counterspells do a good job too. But Thoughtseize and discard spells in general really need pressure backed up behind it. And without that pressure, a single Thoughtseize or counterspell is just not going to get the job done.
All right, Todd, now we're getting to the top 2. These decks are exciting. One of this, I'm surprised not to see it in your number 1 because you're known as the guy who, you didn't necessarily break Supreme Verdict, but you did put Sphinx's Revelation on the map, making all these Azorius cards that came out of Return to Ravnica relevant. Blue-White Control, it's your number 2 place. Why is this deck strong?
I actually think that Azorius Control is currently the best deck in Pioneer. Now, I think that it gained the most from Neon Dynasty, mostly because the Wandering Emperor creates an entirely new dimension of both interaction and pressure that a lot of decks can't handle. You come down, you exile their best threat that's attacking you, gain 2 life on top of it, and then you get to untap with a Planeswalker that can produce more threats, start to tick up, and then threaten to minus and kill a creature later. But mostly it's just the fact that it plays at instant speed, so you can kind of put your opponent in this bottleneck where if they attack into you, you can hit them with Wandering Emperor. If they don't attack into you, you hit them with Memory Deluge and start gaining card advantage. And then couple that all together with really efficient removal with March of the Otherworldly Light, efficient counterspells like Dovin's Veto, and you start to see why they're able to basically check every threat from every angle and why it's so physically hard to beat them. It's just physically hard to win the game against them. They're so insanely scrappy, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and when you lose, it's miserable. The counter magic is really good against combo. The sweepers are super strong against aggro. How do you beat this deck?
Well, I think I may have found the answer. Today on stream, I actually played just kind of a normal Gruul aggro deck, and I had a bunch of creatures with haste. And if you find the sweet spot where against Supreme Verdict decks, where they can't hold up counter spells because you have a bunch of pressure in play from your early threats, and then also when they do cast their Supreme Verdict, you're like, oh, well, here's Glorybringer. Deal with this one now. Oh, we killed that. Okay. Here's Reckless Stormseeker, the new werewolf that gives them haste, and things like that.
So would this list make your top 5 after today?
No, it's just a little project I started working on today. I had a 5-0 with it, and it felt really good. But I think that's mostly because I didn't play against Arclight Phoenix decks. I think most of the green decks that play Llanowar Elves and other creature, like heavy on creatures, are just like big underdogs to any deck playing Lightning Axe.
Okay, so we're down to just one deck left. Now, playtesting is really expensive. There's a lot of decks in the meta game. Outside of just writing on the backs of cards with Sharpies with your friends, how do you playtest in this meta game? Do you have any tips?
So, Magic Online is a great place to play older formats. I know it's a clunky system and it's 20 years old. I've been playing it since the beginning. 2001, Invasion Block. I've been around the block. And Magic Online being a great place to play, the cards are actually relatively similar in price to real life cards, which is a little daunting. It's hard to have a collection on Magic Online and in real life. But recently, there have been a couple of different companies that started doing card rental services for Magic Online. Now, I am an affiliate for manatraders.com, and if you use my code TandyMTG, you can save 15% off your first 2 months. That actually gives a kickback to me, so if you want to help support my content, that's a great way to do it while being able to play Pioneer or Modern or any other format for relatively cheap.
Okay, finally, let's wrap this up. Let's get to deck number 1. What is the top deck according to you in the format?
So the number 1 deck is Naya Winota. And I know that some people are going to disagree with me. Some people are going to fight me tooth and nail about it. And here's what I'll tell you. I have never in my entire life playing Magic for over 20 years have seen a card as one-sided slaughtering as Winota Joiner Forces. It's so easy to turn on. The games where you turn it on are just laughable compared to any other type of game you could play. And the fact that it's so immediate, when you cast Winota, you attack with one creature, you find, your Tovolar's Huntmaster or your Brutal Cathar or Kenrith Returned King, and you just put your opponent in such a hole that if they don't have Supreme Verdict, the turn after you play Winota, they're dead. And sometimes, even if they do Supreme Verdict you still have an Eska's Chariot on the battlefield, and all you gotta do is crew it up and attack for 4 again. This deck is one of the best Llanowar Elves decks I've ever seen because it uses the Llanowar Elves deck in 2 ways. Llanowar Elves being mana accelerators is a huge deal and one of the easiest ways to make them good. But when you use that to make them more powerful by having a way to ramp, but also B, using their bodies after they've normally outlived their usefulness, you actually just add a second life to a card that's already absurdly powerful in its first dimension.
Okay, Todd, this deck sounds terrifying. What if I'm not one of the people who brought Winota to my tournament? How do I beat Winota?
So you beat Winota in a variety of ways, but the easiest way to beat Winota is to just kill the early creatures. If you kill the Llanowar Elves, if you kill the Voice Resurgence, you kill the Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, you're going to slow them down, and you're going to make the card Winota much more awkward than it would normally be. What you'll see in Pioneer oftentimes is that decks actually have 2 focal points where one side is vulnerable to one type of interaction like Thoughtseize, and the other side is vulnerable to other types of interaction like Fatal Push. And the breaking point in Naya Winota is Eska's Chariot versus Winota itself. And when you have some draws that feature Eska's Chariot, you're going to just blow past people holding up removal. And other times, if they tap out for a piece of the puzzle or a thing in the ice, you just get to play Winota with a dry board from your opponent when they're tapped out, and then the game usually ends on the spot. Azorius Control is one of the few decks I think that has a way to catch up from a Winota that triggers. Every other deck has this unwritten rule that if you can't kill Winota, you have a bad matchup against Winota.
When you say a way to catch up from Winota that triggers, are you talking about Settle the Wreckage?
I'm talking about just taking one hit and then playing a board wipe, whether it's Farewell or Supreme Verdict. Normally a one Winota trigger hitting a Huntmaster is game over against mid-range decks because you're just getting such a boost in virtual card advantage and board presence for such a small investment. Not only do you get the 4-mana 4/4 Winota itself, but you're also adding a Brutal Cathar or an Elite Spellbinder that's hitting your opponent and disrupting them. Or you're hitting a Tovolar's Huntmaster or Kenrith and just burying them in attack damage and just board presence. But Azorius Control is one of the few decks that has a way to recoup as long as they don't die on the spot.
Okay, finally, let's put cards on the table, Todd. Say you have a tournament tomorrow, and it's a special kind of tournament where if you lose, you die. What deck do you bring?
I would play Is It Phoenix.
Is it? Wow, that was number 3 on your list. Why? Are you gaming everyone else?
No, I'm not gaming everyone else. It's a very fluid metagame with a lot of decks that are very powerful. And I think that consistently, even in the face of a lot of combo decks and a lot of control decks, you're still seeing Arclight Phoenix be one of the top decks in the format. People are iterating on it constantly, changing it, making it better or worse against control or aggro or combo. And I think it's one of those decks that's just easily customizable to beat the type of deck you want to beat. And I think that it gives you the most play because you have so much card manipulation and card advantage. It's just a powerful deck. Whenever I play Phoenix, the only thing I'm really scared of is Lotus Field. I'm not even that scared of Blue-White Control. And everything else, I think, is pretty easy if they have creatures. So
okay, thank you very much, Todd, for all your insight. I hope you guys listening, maybe this gives you a bit of prep for the qualifiers for Bologna, or just your Pioneer at F&M. Now, if you want to watch some really high-quality Twitch streaming in the Pioneer format, Todd goes under Tandy on Twitch. And if you are new to this channel and like the content here, please sub. Who knows, maybe if you don't sub, they'll switch it back to Mythic Invitational from ProTour. We can't control that. Anyways, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.